What if the song that stops you in your tracks is the one that brings you back to life? On a rainy New York night, Tom Hanks hears a familiar melody drifting from a subway stairwell, the kind of song that opens doors to the past. There, he finds Eli, a weathered street musician with a cracked guitar, a quiet presence, and a story hidden behind every note. Drawn together by a shared ache for something lost, Tom and Eli begin an unexpected journey, one of memory, music, and quiet redemption. From the sidewalks of the city to a small bookstore apartment above a forgotten corner of the world, their connection becomes a catalyst, not just for Eli's return to stability, but for everyone who has ever needed a second chance. This is a tender, soul-stirring tale about grief, grace, and the way a single song can carry us back to the place we never stopped longing for. New York had a way of humming even when it was quiet. That night, the city wasn't roaring like it usually did. It wasn't alive with energy or pulsing with people late for something. It felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down but left the lights on. Rain whispered across the pavement in long, slanted strokes, draping the streets in soft static. Neon signs blurred in reflections. Traffic lights flickered through the mist like signals from another planet. Tom Hanks walked alone, hands buried in the pockets of a worn black coat, the brim of his cap pulled low. He wasn't trying to hide, not really. At this hour, and in this part of the city, no one cared much who anyone was. It was one of the reasons he loved New York. You could vanish in it. And sometimes, that's exactly what he needed. He had just left a modest charity gala, literacy, focused, quiet, the kind of event where the donors clapped softly and the speeches ended with polite laughter. He'd shaken hands, taken photos, accepted a framed certificate. Then he'd slipped out early, giving his driver the night off and choosing to walk instead. He didn't even know why. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the way the night wrapped itself around his thoughts like a coat. He turned down a side street, boots clicking softly against the damp pavement. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular. The hotel was only a few blocks away, but his feet weren't quite ready to stop moving. That's when he heard it. It wasn't loud. In fact, he might have missed it entirely if he hadn't paused under a flickering street lamp to adjust the scarf around his neck. But there it was, soft, rhythmic, delicate in a way that music usually isn't when played outdoors. A guitar, not a recording, not a car stereo. Something real, played by human hands. The melody floated just above the hiss of the rain, each note falling into the wet air like it belonged there. Tom tilted his head and listened harder. It wasn't just any song, it was that song. This must be the place. It hit him in the chest before he even consciously recognized it. His father's song, the one that used to drift from the garage on slow Sunday mornings, the one his dad hummed under his breath while sanding wood or cleaning fishing gear or fixing whatever had fallen apart that week. Tom hadn't heard it in years. Not like this. Not out in the world. Not when he wasn't expecting it. He followed the sound instinctively, crossing the street without even checking for cars, drawn like someone hearing their name whispered from a dream. The music grew clearer as he approached the subway entrance, a wide stairwell yawning into the underground, a warm glow spilling from within. At the top of the stairs, tucked beneath the overhang, sat a man. Mid-60s, maybe older, thin, weather-worn. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, and his beard curled like smoke under the edges of his hood. The guitar in his lap looked like it had survived a war, its sunburst finish cracked, a piece of silver duct tape holding a split at the bottom together. A battered case sat open at his feet, half filled with coins, crumpled bills, and a few wet leaves. But the man's hands, those were steady, deliberate. Each finger-picked note was gentle but sure, reverent in the way only someone who really meant it could play. He didn't look up, didn't see Tom approach. He was somewhere else entirely, eyes half closed, head bobbing slightly with the rhythm. Tom stood just outside the circle of light, hands still in his coat pockets. The rain tapped against the fabric of his shoulders, but he didn't feel it. He didn't want to feel anything except the music. The man sang, low and quiet, just fragments of lyrics, enough to trace the memory. Tom's throat tightened. His father's voice lived in that melody. Not literally, of course, but in the way the chords wrapped around him, in the way the singer lingered on certain phrases like they mattered more than others, in the way the guitar seemed to breathe between notes. It was all there, a life he'd said goodbye to years ago, rising again in the space between the rain and the reverb of the subway. The final line came, delivered more like a whisper than a lyric. "Home is where I want to be." And then, silence. The man exhaled and rested his hand on the strings. Tom stepped forward, the wet sidewalk squelching under his boot. "That's a beautiful song," he said softly. The man looked up, blinking as if emerging from a dream. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue. Not unkind, just tired. "Your first time hearing it?" he asked. Tom shook his head. "First time hearing it like that." The man gave a slight nod, then looked back down at his guitar. "Most people don't stop," he said. "I almost didn't," Tom admitted. "But you did." Tom glanced down at the open case. "Mind if I sit?" The man gestured with his chin to the low wall beside him. Tom sat, letting the chill of the stone seep through his coat. The city kept moving behind them, but this little pocket of the sidewalk had stopped. "Name's Tom," he said after a pause. The man didn't react, not with recognition, just with a nod. "Eli." They sat in silence for a moment longer. The rain kept falling, the neon signs kept blinking, and the song still hovered in the air, echoing quietly in both their chests, as if the night itself hadn't finished listening. Tom sat beside Eli like he might next to an old friend, though they hadn't known each other more than 3 minutes. It wasn't familiarity, not exactly. It was something else. An atmosphere, maybe. Something in the way the music had settled in Tom's chest, like a memory already waiting there. Eli didn't speak. He leaned forward, wiping a bit of rain from the guitar's strings with the sleeve of his coat. Then he strummed gently, half a chord, the kind you play more for your own hands than for anyone else. Tom stared at the sidewalk ahead of them, watching the way raindrops danced in the dim light. "My dad used to hum that song while he worked in the garage," he said, voice low. "Didn't know the words, just kind of half, sang them, like he was remembering the feeling more than the lyrics." Eli didn't look up. "That's the only way to do it right." Tom smiled softly. It's strange how fast it came back. Just hearing those notes felt like I was standing next to him again. Eli finally turned to look at him. His face was weathered, but not bitter. He had the kind of presence that comes from having lived through something, not run from it. "I play it a lot," he said. "That one sticks." "You play for people passing by?" "Sometimes, but mostly I just play. Doesn't matter who hears it." Tom nodded. "Still, you play like it matters." Eli chuckled once, dry and amused. "Because it does." He shifted on the crate he sat on, adjusting the guitar on his knee. "You been playing long?" Tom asked. "Since I was 10, Eli said. "My uncle gave me a beat, up acoustic with 2 strings, and said, 'If you can make a song out of that, I'll buy you new ones.' So I did. And did he? Eli's eyes softened. He bought me a whole new guitar. First real thing I ever owned. They both looked out toward the street again. The world moved differently now, slower somehow. The city was still awake, still alive, but in this moment, Tom and Eli seemed to be moving just outside of it, like they'd found a sliver of time no one else could see. I played bars, weddings, sessions, Eli continued. Never had a name anyone remembered, but I had enough work to keep a roof over my head and calluses on my fingers. Tom turned toward him. Studio work? Mostly. Background rhythm. Fill-ins. I was the guy who made other people sound better. There's something noble in that, Tom said. Eli gave a small nod. Maybe. But nobility doesn't pay rent. Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was starting to feel the gravity of Eli's story, piece by piece, like uncovering a photograph long buried in the back of a drawer. Ever tour? Eli shook his head. Got close once. Played backup for a folk singer who nearly broke out. Thought we were on our way. Then the label folded, and she went back to teaching 3rd grade. Last I heard, she got married and moved to Vermont. He strummed once, let the chord linger. I kept playing, but the jobs got thinner. The friends did too. Tom didn't speak. He didn't want to fill the space with anything unnecessary. My wife, Lucille, kept me grounded, Eli said after a while. She worked at a library, made bad tea and beautiful scents. She believed in me long after I stopped believing in myself. Tom turned to him quietly. Sounds like she was the song behind the music. Eli smiled, small and sincere. That's exactly what she was. He rested his hand on the guitar and looked down. When she died, I tried to keep going. But nothing felt real anymore. Not the gigs, not the money, not the silence afterward. Tom didn't need to ask what happened next. He already knew, or at least he could see the shape of it in Eli's posture, in the well-worn coat, in the way he held the guitar like it was both shield and anchor. I sold everything, Eli said, except June. Tom looked puzzled. June? Eli tapped the guitar's body gently. This one. That's her name. Short for Juniper. Lucille used to say the juniper tree could survive anything and still smell sweet. Tom nodded, thoughtful. So I kept her, Eli said, even when I couldn't keep myself. The rain lightened, becoming more of a mist than a drizzle. Tom glanced up at the sky, at the street lamp flickering overhead. The night was settling into that deep lull where most people had gone home, and the rest were searching for reasons not to. I'm not sure why I stopped, Tom said suddenly. I've heard hundreds of people play that song, but something about the way you played it, something about that moment, it stopped me. Eli didn't say anything for a while. Then he looked at Tom, really looked at him. Maybe it stopped you because it was supposed to. Tom didn't know how to respond to that, but it didn't feel like a line. It felt like the truth. I'm not asking for anything, Eli added. I've had enough people try to save me for the wrong reasons. I don't need charity. I didn't stop because I felt sorry for you, Tom said. I stopped because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Eli studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod, like he accepted that. Not as flattery, but as fact. They sat in silence again. 2 men, 1 guitar. A song that neither of them had written, but both had lived. And in that moment, it was enough. The diner smelled like coffee grounds, scorched toast, and the ghosts of too many meals past. It was the kind of place that time forgot. Tiled floors dulled with age, faded red vinyl booths, a jukebox that hadn't played anything since the Clinton administration. But it was open, and it was warm. That was enough. Tom sat across from Eli in the corner booth. Eli's guitar, June, rested gently against the wall beside him, as if it had its own seat. A waitress who looked like she'd seen it all poured them each a mug of coffee without saying a word. Eli blew across the surface of his cup like a ritual. Tom took a sip and made a face. "Still the worst good coffee in the world," he said. Eli grinned. "That's why it works. Bad coffee in a quiet diner is the great equalizer." Tom nodded, smiling. "Can't argue with that." They sat in silence for a while. The rain tapped lightly against the window behind them, forming crooked rivers down the glass. Somewhere in the back, a radio played a tinny old jazz track that had more hiss than horn. Tom leaned back in the booth, fingers wrapped around the warmth of his mug. "So," he said, "you really played for 20 years, and never once took center stage?" Eli shrugged. "Center stage never felt right. I liked the side, the corners, the shadows. You get a better view from there." "You sound like a man who could have had his own name on the marquee." "I sound like a man who did just fine tuning someone else's guitar." Tom chuckled. "You ever regret it?" "Not the playing," Eli said, "but I regret some of the places it led me away from. Lucille, mostly. I think I spent too much time chasing validation and not enough time just being with her." He traced a circle on the table with his fingertip, lost in thought. "She never asked me to stop, never gave me an ultimatum. But when she got sick, I knew I'd missed too many dinners, too many Sunday mornings. She didn't hold it against me. That made it worse." Tom sat quietly, absorbing it. He knew what it was like to have time slip through your fingers while the world applauded you for it. "I missed my son's graduation once," Tom said. "Got caught up on a reshoot that ran late. I told myself he'd understand. And he did. But I never forgot the look in his eyes." Eli didn't reply, but something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding. Maybe even forgiveness, though it wasn't his to give. The waitress returned and dropped a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Eli, then slid Tom a refill without a word. Eli didn't wait. He tore into the food like a man who'd learned not to waste a hot meal. Tom didn't comment. Hunger like that came from more than a missed dinner. "Music's the only thing that never left me," Eli said between bites. "Jobs come and go. Friends drift. Grief doesn't ask for permission. But the guitar, she's still there, still humming in my hands like she's glad I showed up." Tom watched him, admiring the honesty. There was no self-pity in it, just truth. "What's the best crowd you ever played for?" Tom asked. Eli smiled with his mouth full. "Kids. Always the kids. One time I played at a school in Queens, last-minute fill in for a music teacher who had the flu. They didn't care if I'd played with anyone famous. Didn't care if my shirt was wrinkled or if the amp was crackly. They just sat and listened. One kid cried, said it was the first time he felt like his heart had words." Tom sat back, letting the words sink in. "That's the kind of performance that matters." "That's the only kind that matters," Eli said. They ate, drank, and talked. About music, about people they'd loved, about things they'd lost. It was strange how natural it felt. Two lives from completely different worlds, finding rhythm like a melody built from shared silence. After the plates were cleared and the coffee was mostly cold, Tom reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded flyer. It was for a benefit event, music, spoken word, small crowd, no press. "I'm hosting this charity fundraiser in 3 weeks," he said, sliding the paper across the table. No cameras, no suits, just real people. I think you should play." Eli stared at the flyer like it had teeth. "I'm not looking for a comeback." "It's not a comeback," Tom said. "It's just a room full of hearts that could use a reminder of what music sounds like when it's honest." Eli looked at the address. He didn't touch the flyer. "I don't know if I can stand in front of people like that anymore." "You already did," Tom said quietly. "Back on the subway steps." Eli took a long sip from his mug, then finally reached for the flyer. He folded it slowly, tucking it into the inside pocket of his coat like something fragile. "No promises. No pressure." They exchanged numbers, stood up, and gathered their things. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under soft sodium lights, every puddle a mirror reflecting someone else's story. Tom extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. Eli shook it, firm and warm. "I should be the one saying that," he replied. "You saw me." Tom smiled. "You played first." And then they went their separate ways, each man stepping back into a city that suddenly felt a little less lonely. Tom couldn't get the sound of Eli's voice out of his head. It wasn't just the song, though "This Must Be the Place" had been floating in his mind like a slow river since that night. It was the way Eli had played it, the way he had spoken afterward, like every word had to be earned, like each sentence was pulled from somewhere deep beneath years of dust and loss, and still came out clear. Tom had known a lot of talented people in his life, actors, musicians, writers, but Eli was something different. Eli was the kind of voice that made the room quiet before it even realized it needed to be. And that's why Tom couldn't let it go. He sat in his study the next morning, an overstuffed chair near the window, coffee in hand, laptop open but untouched. The flyer for the benefit was still sitting beside him, slightly crumpled from his coat pocket. He glanced at it, then picked up his phone. "Hey," he said after a few rings. "This is Tom. I need a favor." 3 days later, Tom walked into a low, ceilinged rehearsal space hidden between a flower shop and a locksmith downtown. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since 1983, and that was part of its charm. Worn carpet, scratched up upright piano, a dozen mismatched chairs pushed against the wall, soundproof panels hung at odd angles like crooked teeth. The air smelled faintly of wood glue and warm wires. It was perfect. He spoke to the studio manager, a wiry guy named Raphael, who looked like he taught jazz on the side and could fix a broken amp blindfolded. Tom explained what he needed: a quiet space for someone to rehearse privately. No press, no attention. Just a safe place to breathe. Raphael didn't ask questions. He just handed Tom a key and said, "You've got it through next Friday." Tom waited until dusk to call. He stood near the windows of his apartment, watching the city take a breath between rush hours. Lights clicked on in the windows of neighboring buildings. A siren sang a few blocks away, then faded. He pulled Eli's number from his notes app and hit dial. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "This is Eli," he said. Tom hadn't heard him sound that formal before. "Hey, it's me," Tom said. "I hope it's okay I'm calling." A pause. "Yeah," Eli said. "Wasn't expecting it, but—" "Yeah." Tom smiled, relieved. "I've got a space set up for you," he said. "A rehearsal room, quiet, private, free of charge, no pressure, but it's yours until the event next week." Eli didn't answer right away. Tom could hear the distant sounds of city noise on his end. A passing bus, footsteps, wind. "That's generous," Eli said finally. "It's not charity," Tom replied. "It's an invitation." More silence. Tom imagined Eli weighing the offer like he would a strange chord, testing it for dissonance, waiting for it to resolve. "I don't know if I'm ready to perform professionally," Eli said. "You don't have to be," Tom told him. "Just come play. For yourself. Let the room decide." There was a long breath on the other end. "I'll think about it," Eli said. "That's all I ask." They hung up without fanfare. Tom stared at the city lights for a long time after, not really seeing them. 2 days passed with no word. Tom kept himself busy with meetings, calls, late-night edits on a script he'd promised to look at weeks ago. But his mind always wandered back to that night. The subway, the rain, the song. He returned to the studio once, just to check in. The room was untouched. Raphael gave him a sympathetic shrug. Sometimes people need more time to remember who they are. Tom nodded. Sometimes they need someone else to believe it first. Then, on the 3rd day, Tom got a text. "Is the room still open?" Tom grinned. He replied, "Always." The next morning, Eli showed up at the rehearsal space. He wore the same coat, same guitar case slung over his shoulder. But there was something different in his walk, like he was moving toward something instead of away from everything. Raphael let him in and pointed him to the back room. Tom wasn't there. He didn't want to be. Not yet. He wanted Eli to have the space without eyes on him, without expectation. Eli stood in the center of the small room and looked around. He didn't sit right away. He paced. He touched the keys of the piano but didn't press them. He rolled his shoulders back and took a breath. Then he opened the case and took out June. The guitar still carried the signs of 1,000 nights, scratches, faded paint, a little crack beneath the bridge. But her strings were new, freshly wound, her neck recently oiled. Eli had taken care of her. She had taken care of him. He sat on the stool, tuned up, then sat still. And finally, he played. Not "This Must Be the Place." Not a song with a name. He played something slow, unfamiliar, full of grief and grace. His fingers moved like they were remembering something long buried. The room held it all, soaking up every note like the walls themselves were listening. He didn't know yet whether he'd play for the charity fundraiser. He didn't know if he could face a crowd again. But in that room, in that moment, Eli began the slow work of returning to himself. And the music, faithful as ever, welcomed him back. Eli returned to the rehearsal space the next day, and the day after that. Always early. Always alone. He didn't play right away. He'd walk the perimeter of the room with slow, deliberate steps, hands in his pockets, as if waiting for the ghosts to clear out. Sometimes he'd stare at the piano in the corner, like it might open its mouth and say something he wasn't ready to hear. Eventually, he'd sit, tune, breathe, and then he'd begin to play. The music came slowly, like thawing limbs. His fingers remembered things his body had forgotten. They stumbled at first, slipped off the rhythm, reached for chords that didn't land clean. But each day, the sound grew stronger, more certain. Less like an echo of something lost, and more like a man relearning his own voice. One afternoon, Raphael popped his head in to offer water, and heard Eli playing something low and wordless. Just chords. Then a refrain. Then a few lines hummed under his breath. It wasn't "This Must Be the Place." It wasn't any song Raphael recognized. But it held something. Something that made him stop in the doorway and close his eyes for a few seconds before backing away without saying a word. Tom stayed away for the first few days, on purpose. He knew enough to give artists their space. Eli wasn't a project. He wasn't a redemption arc waiting for a third-act miracle. He was a man finding his way back to something he used to love. When he finally did show up, quietly, no fanfare, Eli didn't look surprised. He glanced up from his stool, offered a small nod, then kept strumming, Tom leaned against the doorframe and listened. "You always sneak in like that?" Eli asked without looking up. "I figured knocking might ruin the take." Eli chuckled. "If it was a take, we'd be on take 23 by now." "Then it must be getting good." Eli set his guitar down on his knee and exhaled through his nose. "I'm rusty." "You're human." Tom stepped inside, pulling the door closed behind him. He sat in the old folding chair by the piano and watched Eli for a moment. "I heard from Raphael you've been coming in every day." Eli shrugged. "Beats playing for squirrels." "You planning to play for people?" Eli didn't answer. He ran his thumb along the fretboard like he was checking for splinters. "Crowds are different," he said. "People listen for different reasons. Some want to be moved. Some want to be impressed. Some just want noise they can feel something over." Tom nodded. "And what do you want?" Eli looked up, eyes clear for the first time in a while. "To feel like I'm not wasting someone's time." Tom sat with that. It wasn't an ego thing. It wasn't even about fear. It was about dignity, the way art strips you bare, asks you to step into the light, and hopes someone doesn't look away. "You won't be," Tom said, "but you have to believe that first." Eli didn't respond. He just picked up the guitar again and started to play. Not loudly, not cleanly, but with intention. Tom closed his eyes and let it wash over him. The next day, Tom brought coffee and an old lyric notebook he'd found buried in a box of film memorabilia. It wasn't his, he wasn't a songwriter, but it had belonged to a musician friend from a past project. The pages were filled with scratched-out verses, strange metaphors, half-finished rhymes. He handed it to Eli without explanation. Eli flipped through the pages in silence, then closed it. "You think I need help writing?" "I think maybe you forgot how much you like the mess of it." Eli laughed, a full, genuine sound that surprised them both. "You might be right." Over the next few days, something shifted. Eli started experimenting, playing melodies out loud he'd normally keep in his head. He brought back pieces of songs he hadn't touched in years, fragments of blues riffs, snatches of jazz, folk finger-picking with lyrics mumbled under his breath. Tom joined in sometimes on the piano, fumbling through chords until they landed on something that worked. They weren't rehearsing for a show anymore. They were rediscovering what it felt like to create. One evening, as the sky outside deepened into twilight, Eli finished playing and sat in silence for a long moment. "That one," Tom said. "What was that?" "Something I wrote for Lucille," Eli said, voice rough with quiet. "Does it have a name?" Eli stared down at June. "Not really. I've just always called it her song." Tom nodded, then stood and walked to the piano. He played a few soft notes that matched Eli's final chord, then looked up. "You should play that at the event." Eli looked like he'd been slapped and kissed at the same time. "I don't know if I can." "Then play it anyway." Eli didn't argue. He just looked at the guitar again, like it might answer for him. The days passed, and the air started to thrum with something heavier. Not pressure, not nerves. Anticipation. The kind that only comes before you step back into something that once broke your heart and hope it's strong enough to hold you now. Eli showed up to the studio each day without fail. He lingered into the quiet hours, reshaping his set piece by piece. He didn't smooth it out or dress it up. He left it raw, honest. But he knew what every note meant. Tom knew the song was ready. Now Eli just had to decide if he was. The night of the charity fundraiser arrived cloaked in quiet anticipation, like the city knew something was about to happen, but didn't want to say it out loud. It wasn't a massive event. No red carpet, no reporters flashing cameras. Just a softly lit gallery space tucked behind a bookstore downtown. Its brick walls strung with warm Edison bulbs and black and white photographs of artists and writers who had once walked the same streets. There were no programs handed out, no assigned seating. People wandered in with wine glasses and folded umbrellas, the kind of crowd that applauded gently and leaned forward when someone started to speak instead of checking their phones. Tom moved through the space like someone hosting a dinner party in his own living room. He shook hands, smiled when appropriate, laughed when it felt real. But all the while, he kept glancing at the entrance. No Eli. Not yet. He didn't panic. He didn't even worry. But he felt it. That subtle tension that comes when you've invited the world to bear witness and aren't sure if the story will show up. At 7:53, 7 minutes before the first performance, the door opened. Eli stepped inside, guitar case in one hand, the other brushing rain off his coat. His hair was still damp, and his boots squeaked slightly on the hardwood. He looked different. Not dressed up, not polished, just present. There was a quiet steadiness in him that hadn't been there before, like he'd stopped running from something and was finally willing to face it. Tom approached, relieved but not surprised. "You made it," he said. "I nearly didn't," Eli replied. "Spent 10 minutes staring at the train tracks trying to talk myself out of it." "What changed your mind?" Eli shrugged. "I figured even if I played like hell, it would still be the most honest thing I've done in a decade." Tom grinned. "I'll take that." He led Eli to the small makeshift stage at the front of the room. Just a stool, a mic, and a single floor lamp casting a soft glow. It didn't look like a stage. It looked like someone's living room. Exactly what Tom wanted. The host of the night, a poet with kind eyes and nervous energy, stepped up to introduce the first act. Tom placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You good?" Eli gave a tight nod. "No, but I'm going anyway." Tom smiled. "That's the only way to do it." 2 short performances followed. One a spoken word piece about migration and memory. The other, a solo cellist who played with such stillness it made people forget how to breathe. Then Tom stepped to the front of the room. He didn't read from notes. He didn't perform. He just told the truth. "3 weeks ago," he began, "I heard a man play a song that stopped me on the street." He looked out at the room, doctors, teachers, filmmakers, waiters, mothers, sons. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. So real that for a few minutes I forgot I was in the city, forgot the weather, forgot myself. All I knew was the feeling that came with it. That feeling of home. He paused. "I asked that man to be here tonight, not because he needed an audience, but because we needed a star." Tom turned slightly. "Eli?" The room shifted. Heads turned. Eli stood slowly, picked up his guitar, walked to the front with the gait of someone heading into a storm. He sat down, adjusted the mic with hands that barely trembled, and didn't speak for a long time. Then, "I used to think music was only worth playing if people clapped at the end." A few chuckles. "I don't think that anymore." He strummed the first chord. This must be the place. There was no intro, no build-up, just that haunting, familiar progression, soft, soulful, soaked in memory. His voice came gently, threadbare in places, but full of grace. Tom watched the room shift. People leaned forward. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. A man in a tailored suit closed his laptop and just listened. When Eli reached the chorus, something happened, not dramatic, not loud. Just a moment where the whole room breathed in sync. A heartbeat disguised as a song. When the last note faded, no one clapped right away. Not out of confusion, out of reverence. And then, slowly, Hands began to move. Not in frenzy, in gratitude. Eli didn't smile. He didn't bow. He just nodded once, then shifted in his seat. "I wrote this one," he said. "For my wife." Tom's breath caught. It wasn't just a song. It was a memory stitched into chords. A love letter to a woman gone, but never absent. Every note sounded like something being let go and held onto at the same time. He finished the piece with his eyes closed. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Then, applause. Louder this time. Not for show. For him. Eli stood, nodded again, and walked back to his seat. He didn't look around for approval. He didn't need to. Tom met him halfway. "You did it," he said. Eli exhaled. "I almost walked out after the first song." "But you didn't." "No," Eli said. "I guess I still had something to say." Tom didn't reply. He just patted him once on the back, then looked out over the crowd, smiling, talking, changed. And in the quiet that followed, as the next performer took the stage, Eli finally felt it. Not pride, not relief. Just the slow, soft return of a man coming back into himself. He didn't linger. After the applause had softened and the next act had taken the stage, Eli packed up June, nodded once to Tom from across the room, and slipped out a side door. No goodbyes, no congratulations, just the cool night air waiting for him, clean and unfamiliar. He walked alone for a few blocks, the guitar case bumping gently against his leg, the city breathing around him like it knew something had shifted. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt open, like the space inside him that music had once filled was now lit again, quietly, without asking permission. That night, as Eli fell asleep, he had no idea that the performance had been recorded. He'd barely noticed the woman in the back row with the scarf, filming with her phone propped discreetly against a coffee cup. She wasn't trying to go viral, she just wanted to remember the song that had cracked something open in her that night. But the video did what Eli never intended it to do. It spread. It was raw and quiet and unpolished. Just a man, a stool, and a guitar whose strings buzzed a little in the low notes. But it caught fire in the slow, burning way that only truth can, shared from one person to the next. Not because of celebrity, but because of resonance. By the end of the week, it had been viewed 100,000 times. By the end of the second, 1,000,000. Comments poured in. "I don't know who this man is, but that song made me cry in my kitchen. Reminds me of my father's hands on Sunday mornings. He's not singing at me, he's singing for something." Tom called Eli the morning the views crossed 1,000,000. He didn't lead with it. He just said, "You should probably check your phone." Eli didn't. Not at first. He didn't even own a smartphone. His was a battered flip model with a cracked screen and a contact list made up of people who no longer picked up. When he finally borrowed Raphael's laptop and typed his name into YouTube, he stared at the screen like it had mispronounced something sacred. "That's not supposed to happen," he said softly. Tom, sitting beside him, shrugged. Sometimes the world gets it right. The interview requests came next. NPR, a popular podcast, a morning show, local news outlets called The Studio. Some sent crews without permission, waiting outside in vans with cameras ready. Tom handled what he could, shielded Eli where it mattered, declined offers that felt like they were more interested in the story than the person. Eli stayed quiet through most of it. He didn't want to talk about homelessness or addiction or loss. He didn't want to be repackaged into an inspirational headline. All he wanted was a chair, a warm room, and people who listened with their whole hearts. So he chose carefully. A single interview with a local journalist named Marissa Dean, who'd sent a handwritten letter instead of an email. She'd seen the video, said it reminded her of a lullaby her mother used to sing. Eli liked that. It felt real. The interview took place in the back of the rehearsal studio. No lights, no crew, just a notepad and a soft-spoken woman who asked questions gently and didn't interrupt when Eli needed time to answer. She didn't ask what it was like to lose everything. She asked what it meant to find the music again. And Eli told her the truth, that it wasn't a straight path, that some days still felt like standing on broken glass, that his guitar, June, had saved his life more times than he could count. The article ran 3 days later in a weekend edition under the title, "The Song That Came Back, One Musician's Return to Something True." It was short, thoughtful, quiet in tone, but it reached people. And not just the audience who needed to hear the music. It reached people who remembered Eli. A woman from a youth center in Queens emailed Raphael directly. She had been in the room years ago, when Eli had filled in as a last-minute guest for a 5th-grade music class. She remembered how the students had sat in stunned silence when he played the blues on an unplugged electric guitar. She asked if he'd be willing to come back, not to perform, just to teach. Eli didn't answer right away. He didn't know if he could teach anymore, didn't know if he had anything worth passing down. But 2 weeks later, he walked through the doors of that center with June in his hands. The kids didn't care about the video. Most hadn't seen it. They just liked the way he talked about music like it was a living, breathing friend. He taught them how to hold a chord, how to find rhythm in breath, how to tell the difference between playing something and feeling it. And somewhere between lessons, without ceremony, he realized he was teaching himself again, too. Tom visited one afternoon, slipping into the back of the classroom as Eli demonstrated the difference between a G major and a G7. Eli looked up, grinned faintly. "You lost," he called out. "Just checking up on the talent," Tom replied. After class, they sat on a bench outside while the students tumbled into the yard behind them, laughter echoing off the concrete. Eli leaned back, arms crossed, guitar case at his feet. "I thought I was done," he said. "Thought the world had decided I wasn't needed." Tom shook his head. "Turns out you were just waiting for the right room." Eli looked out over the street. It was sunny that day, too warm for coats. A soft breeze lifted the edge of his shirt collar. "I don't want a stage," he said. "Not really. I don't want to be some symbol or story." "You're not," Tom said. "You're just someone who showed up. That's all." Eli smiled. "Maybe that's enough." They sat in companionable silence for a long time, letting the sounds of children and traffic and spring unfold around them. And for the first time in years, Eli wasn't wondering where he'd sleep that night. He wasn't wondering if his songs mattered. He was thinking about what to teach next week. The room wasn't big, maybe 400 square feet, if you counted the closet that refused to close and the bathroom door that stuck halfway shut. But it was Eli's. The windows looked out over a side street lined with dog-eared paperbacks and bargain bins of used records, all part of the independent bookstore below Page and Turn, a crooked little shop that had once hosted poetry nights and now sold just enough to keep the lights on. The apartment had come up for rent in a quiet moment, and Tom had jumped on it before Eli even knew. He didn't tell him until everything was signed. The first 6 months already paid in full. "I'm not taking charity," Eli said the moment Tom handed him the key. Tom didn't flinch. "It's not charity. It's a space. For your guitar. For your words. For your ghosts. And for whatever comes next." Eli stared at the key for a long moment. Then he took it. He moved in with a single duffel bag, his guitar, and a folded photograph of Lucille tucked inside the front pocket of his coat. That was it. No furniture, no boxes, Just stories and songs. The first thing he did was pull back the curtains. Light flooded in. Dust swirled through the air like music not yet written. He opened the windows, let the breeze in, and breathed. Then he sat down in the corner and played a song. Just one. For Lucille. He didn't cry, not exactly. But something left him in that moment. Something heavy that had been riding his shoulders for years. A breath, maybe, or a weight. He took June out of her case and hung her on the wall using 2 bent nails and a piece of twine. She deserved better, but she didn't complain. The wall creaked a little under the weight, but held. There was no television, no internet, just a radio he found at a thrift shop, which he tuned to a jazz station that faded in and out like memory. It was enough. Each morning, Eli walked downstairs to the bookstore and greeted the owner, a kind-eyed woman named Fran, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and made chamomile tea for customers who didn't buy anything. She asked no questions about who he was or where he came from. She just said, "Welcome home," the day he moved in. Eli liked her immediately. He'd spend an hour most mornings flipping through the used record bin, picking up dusty copies of albums he used to play backup on, never credited, of course. But he could still hear himself in the twang of a bridge, the swing of a solo. Sometimes he bought one for nostalgia. Sometimes he just left it in the bin, smiled, and walked back upstairs. At night, he wrote. Not songs at first, just thoughts, journal entries, fragments of melody, words Lucille might have liked, words she might have said. The room was quiet enough for him to hear her voice sometimes. He bought a second-hand desk from the shop down the block and placed it under the window. On it, he kept a single photo, Lucille sitting in their old kitchen, holding a mug and laughing at something out of frame. It made the room feel full. Tom visited whenever he came through the city, never unannounced, always with 2 coffees and a conversation ready but optional. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they just sat, listening to old records or nothing at all. "You settling in?" Tom asked one evening, glancing around at the slowly gathering collection of books, vinyl and guitar picks in glass jars. Eli nodded. "I forgot how much space changes a person." "You mean freedom?" "No," Eli said. "The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like loneliness." Tom nodded. He understood. "I kept thinking," Eli added, "if I ever got off the street, I'd feel joy, gratitude. But what I feel now is room. Room to think, to feel, to wait without fear." "That sounds like peace?" Eli looked around, at the guitar on the wall, at the photo, at the window open just an inch, letting in the city hum. "Maybe it is." Word continued to spread, but Eli didn't chase it. He said no to the agents, declined the offers to record an album about his journey, turned down a streaming platform that wanted to feature him. "I'm not content," he told Tom one day, "but I'm grounded in what I want, and that's rarer." Instead, he taught. 2 nights a week at the youth center in Queens, Sundays at the bookstore, where Fran let him run a music and memory hour for anyone who wanted to come listen or share a song from their past. Sometimes 3 people showed up, sometimes 30. It didn't matter. He played. Not for fame, not for a crowd, but for the room. For the kids who didn't know how to say what they were feeling. For the elderly man who brought his late wife's favorite record every week. For the woman who always sat in the back and never spoke but cried when he played Lucille's song. He played because it was the only way he knew how to say, "I'm still here, 1 year to the day, the same city, the same sidewalks, the same rain." But everything had changed. Eli stood inside Page and Turn, holding a cup of tea Fran had just brewed, her ritual chamomile blend with honey and too much lemon, He didn't mind. He'd grown used to the sour sting, said it helped his throat when he played, even if that wasn't quite true. The bookstore smelled like paper and old wood. The upstairs window, in the apartment now filled with second-hand warmth and shelves of notebooks, glowed with soft light. It had become more than a place to sleep. It was his place. And for Eli, that had once felt impossible. Outside, the rain fell just as it had the night he met Tom. Eli watched it bead on the glass, tracing its way down in meandering lines, like it was remembering the same moment too. Behind him, a young girl plucked a few chords on a classical guitar with plastic strings. Her fingers were stiff but determined. Eli watched for a minute, then gently reached over to adjust her hand. "There," he said. "Don't press too hard. Let the string breathe." She nodded, focused. He smiled and stood back. Tuesdays had become his favorite day. The bookstore opened late, so Eli could hold lessons in the back room. The students ranged from age 7 to 70, some just learning, others rediscovering music they thought they'd left behind. He never charged. He wouldn't accept payment even when it was offered. But if someone brought him food, or a record, or a hand, scrawled thank you note, he accepted that with quiet gratitude. Tom visited less frequently now, but never disappeared. That was the kind of man he was, close enough to support, distant enough to never cast a shadow. They spoke every couple weeks. Tom was working on a new film and traveling more, but every time he came back into town, he stopped by the shop, always with 2 coffees, always with time. He arrived that afternoon unannounced, though Fran didn't blink when she saw him. "Upstairs," she said, "or music hour, wherever he needs to be." Tom nodded, slipped past the shelves, and found Eli seated on the bench beneath the bookstore's big front window. He was tuning June, who looked as worn and lovely as ever. "You still using that same string gauge?" Tom asked as he sat beside him. Eli smirked. "Some things don't need changing." They sat in silence for a moment, both watching the rain. "How long's it been?" Tom asked. "Since what?" "The night." Eli didn't need clarification. 360, 5 days. Not that I'm counting. Tom leaned back against the window. "You look different." "I sleep indoors now. That helps." Tom gave him a sidelong glance. "It's more than that." Eli nodded, fingers brushing lightly over the fretboard. "I feel real again, like I belong in my own story." Tom smiled. "You always did. You just needed a new chapter." Eli gave a small, quiet laugh. "And a patient editor." Later that evening, Eli played at the small cafe 2 blocks from the shop. It wasn't a gig, not really, just a standing invitation. Every Friday, the owner, a big-hearted man named Marco, cleared a corner for Eli and his guitar. No posters, no tickets, just music, if Eli felt like showing up. He always did. That night, the room was comfortably full. Locals, students, a couple tourists who had stumbled in, lured by the soft sound of strings and steam. Eli didn't make a big introduction. He never did. He just sat, adjusted the mic, and started to play. First a cover, John Prine's Souvenirs. Then something original, wordless, soft as breath. Then, halfway through the set, he paused. He looked out at the crowd and saw not strangers, but stories. People who came not to be impressed, but to feel. He cleared his throat. "I don't normally talk between songs," he said. "But tonight marks a year since someone heard me play on a street corner and decided not to keep walking." He looked down at his guitar. "I didn't think I'd still be here." A beat passed. The cafe was silent. "But I am." He strummed the first notes of Lucille's song, the one he never recorded, the one he played only in rooms that felt like home. That night, he played it with clarity. Not pain, not longing, just love. Just remembrance. And when the last note faded, the applause was gentle. Not out of politeness. Out of something much deeper. Afterward, Tom walked him home. The city was glistening again. Sidewalks wet. Streetlights soft. It was as if the night had been rehearsed, familiar in every detail. At the steps to the bookstore, Eli stopped. "Funny how a year changes the way you measure things," he said. "Back then, I was counting the hours between shelters. Now I'm counting chords, conversations, cups of tea." Tom smiled. "That's a good life." Eli looked up at the window glowing above them, then at the guitar in his hand. "It really is." They shook hands, not formal, not final, just familiar. Then Tom turned to go, and Eli climbed the steps and slipped inside. He took June from her case and leaned her gently against the desk. He lit the small lamp, pulled a blank page from a notebook, and wrote just one sentence at the top. "This must be the place." Then he picked up the guitar and played softly, into the quiet. Eli sat with the guitar resting in his lap, his fingers idle on the strings, the page still blank aside from the single line he'd written. "This must be the place." He didn't know why that phrase meant so much now. Maybe because it had always been his song, even before he could admit it. Maybe because it was never about geography, never about the room, or the roof, or the street. It was about arrival, a feeling, a sound that echoed something inside you and said, "You made it." He stared at the line for a long time, then added another beneath it. "The song doesn't save you, but it stays with you while you save yourself." He set the notebook aside. The city moved beyond the window in slow pulses, headlights bleeding through rain, the soft shuffle of distant footsteps. A saxophone played faintly from a neighbor's radio, the notes warbling through the walls like a lullaby in another language. He didn't mind. He stood, stretched, and walked to the window. Below, Page and Turn was already closed. Fran had left the "back in the morning" sign in the door, and probably gone home with a thermos of tea and a mystery novel. The world was still turning, still unfinished, and Eli was still here, still alive, still creating. The weight of it struck him then, not with sadness, but with reverence. He looked at June leaning in the corner and felt the same old pull in his chest, the same anchor that had kept him tethered all those years on the street, the same warmth that had trickled back into his fingers as he'd begun to play again. He picked her up and sat by the open window. No audience, no camera, no applause waiting. He played Lucille's song, barely above a whisper, like he was sending it out to the night, to the version of himself who had once believed it was over. And then he played "This Must Be the Place," slow and stripped down, just the chords and breath, no rush to the rhythm, letting each note hang a little longer than it should. Outside, a couple passed under a streetlight and stopped, looking up. They couldn't see him, but they stood there, listening, just for a moment. Eli smiled, kept playing. The song was different now, not a cry, not a memory. It was a homecoming, somewhere between the chords and the silence, between the breath and the rain. The music said what words never could. He had made it. Not back to where he'd been, but forward into a new kind of belonging. Into a life that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Into the place where the song and the man who carried it had both finally come home. If you smiled, please like this video and hit subscribe for more uplifting content.